George Grenville was not a man of charm, but of calculation. A meticulous mind sharpened. Sir Robert Walpole, Britain's first true prime minister, rose not through war or nobility, but through cunning, resilience, and an unshakable grip on power. Born in Norfolk as the third son of a country squire, young Robert was never meant for greatness until tragedy struck. The death of his elder brothers hurled him into inheritance, and with it, a thirst for control. In Parliament, his genius unfolded, not through fiery speeches, but quiet manipulation, forging alliances in smoky rooms and behind closed doors. As South Sea bubbles burst and monarchs wavered, Walpole emerged the master of calm, bribing where he must, soothing where he could, and silencing where he had to. For over 2 decades, he ruled behind the throne, cloaked in charm and whispers, becoming the architect of stability in an age of chaos. Yet, power corroded his legacy. His enemies called him a tyrant in velvet gloves. His allies feared his smile more than a sword. His personal life was cold and controlled, a mirror of the country he led. When the tide turned and whispers became roars, he stepped down, not defeated, but tired, his fingers finally slipping from the levers of power. Walpole's reign was the blueprint for modern politics, calculated, shadowy, and enduring. Was he Britain's greatest savior, or its first illusionist? Spencer Compton, Earl of Wilmington, lived in the quiet spaces of power, never the storm, but always nearby. Born into wealth and aristocracy, his early life was filled with polished etiquette, classical education, and the careful grooming of a man meant for courtly service, not revolution. Lacking the fire of orators or the brilliance of tacticians, Compton rose through loyalty, patience, and sheer longevity, earning the trust of monarchs who valued obedience over ambition. When Sir Robert Walpole's towering shadow finally receded, Compton, already aged and frail, was placed in the Prime Minister's seat, a throne he neither sought nor truly commanded. His leadership was a whisper in an era of noise, as he struggled to steer the ship of state while others grasped the rudder. Real power slipped through his fingers and landed in the hands of stronger ministers, while his health declined and his resolve faded. Behind closed doors, he battled exhaustion, uncertainty, and the knowledge that history would likely forget him. Yet, there was dignity in his stillness. A man who held the nation together, if only briefly, by the force of presence and tradition. Wilmington's story is a quiet elegy in a symphony of giants, a reminder that not every leader roars, some simply endure. Was he a placeholder or a symbol of order in chaos? History leaves the answer suspended in silence. Henry Pelham was a man who spoke softly in an age that roared. Born into a well-connected family with a brother destined to dominate politics, young Henry seemed overshadowed from the start. Yet beneath his calm exterior lay a quiet brilliance, disciplined, diplomatic, and obsessively orderly. His youth was marked not by dramatic rebellion or scandal, but by a relentless dedication to reason and balance. As Prime Minister, Pelham inherited a fragile Britain reeling from war and political upheaval. Where others sought glory, he sought calm. He slashed taxes, stabilized finances, and built alliances not through force, but trust. In smoky chambers and candlelit councils, he worked tirelessly to heal divisions and soothe royal tempers. Though uncharismatic and often underestimated, Pelham was a master of subtle statecraft, a weaver of compromise in a world of confrontation. But peace had its enemies. He was challenged by warmongers, undermined by intrigue, and constantly compared to louder, flashier men. Behind the scenes, he wrestled with doubt, knowing that history rarely celebrates the peacemaker. Yet he endured, crafting years of rare stability that allowed Britain to breathe. When he died suddenly, the nation realized what it had lost. Not a conqueror, but a caretaker. Henry Pelham's story is a tribute to the quiet leader, the one who builds while others boast. Was he forgotten because he avoided chaos, or revered in silence because he tamed it? Thomas Pelham Hulls, Duke of Newcastle, was a whirlwind in silk stockings, a man of boundless energy, endless connections, and a talent for turning chaos into control. Raised in aristocratic luxury and trained from youth to wield influence, he built his life not on vision, but on the strings of patronage, stitching together a vast web of loyalty across Britain's elite. To the outside world, Newcastle was a caricature, nervous, long-winded, forever fussing. But behind the curtains, he orchestrated the machinery of politics with obsessive precision. He didn't lead with fire. He ruled with fear of disorder. As Prime Minister during turbulent years, including the 7 Years' War, Newcastle struggled to command generals, manage factions, and hold an empire together with trembling hands. The battlefield terrified him. The Commons overwhelmed him, yet he endured, clinging to power through alliances and favors. His speeches rambled, his decisions delayed, but his grip on government was unmatched. Still, paranoia haunted him. He feared betrayal at every corner, even as allies slipped away and victories became blunders. His downfall came not with a bang, but a flood of war debts, political rivals, and eroding trust. When he finally fell, he left behind a legacy both admired and mocked. The man who mastered the system, but never the soul of leadership. Was Newcastle a relic of aristocratic games, or the last craftsman of a vanishing age?
William Cavendish, Duke of Devonshire, never sought the fire of leadership. He was a man of marble halls and quiet contemplation, not the chaos of power. Born into immense wealth and noble blood, his early years were filled with scholarly pursuits, art, and duty rather than ambition. He moved through politics like a shadow, respected, reserved, and above the fray. But in 1756, as Britain reeled from the political collapse of its leaders, the reluctant Duke was thrust into the prime ministership, not by desire, but by necessity. For just over 6 months, he bore the crown of responsibility with solemn discomfort, more caretaker than commander. His tenure came in the midst of war and scandal, with a fractured cabinet and a restless public. Cavendish navigated it all with dignity but little force, offering stability when the nation craved strength. Behind the curtains, he was deeply conflicted, torn between personal reticence and the weight of expectation. He loathed political games, despised corruption, and longed to return to the serenity of his estates. When stronger figures rose to reclaim the helm, he stepped aside willingly, vanishing from the center stage with barely a whisper. His legacy is that of the man who answered when called, then disappeared without clinging to the spotlight. Was Cavendish a placeholder, or the embodiment of quiet integrity in a time of noisy ambition?
John Stuart, Earl of Bute, stepped into power as both a symbol of change and a target of rage. Born into Scottish nobility and raised on Enlightenment ideals, Bute was polished, philosophical, and fiercely loyal to King George III, his former tutor and closest confidant. But the corridors of Westminster were no place for outsiders, especially not elegant Scots with royal favor and little political grounding. When he was thrust into the prime ministership in 1762, the whispers turned to howls. He was branded a puppet, a shadow monarch, and worse, a foreigner. Elegant salons mocked him. Venomous pamphlets tore him apart. Yet Bute pressed on, negotiating the Treaty of Paris and ending the 7 Years' War. But peace came with a price: national debt, colonial unrest, and toxic resentment. Every tax became an outrage, every misstep a scandal. Behind his calm facade, Bute wrestled with isolation, personal attacks, and a crumbling will to continue. His enemies weren't just political. They were cultural, emotional, and relentless. After only 11 months, battered and broken by public fury, he resigned, becoming a ghost in the empire he once guided. In exile from power, he turned back to books, gardens, and silence. Jon Stewart's story is one of brilliance destroyed by bias, of a man who dared to lead and paid for it with his name. Was he a visionary too refined for politics? Or a lesson in how a nation devours its own? George Grenville was not a man of charm, but of calculation, a meticulous mind sharpened by law, order, and numbers. Born into a family of political weight, he climbed the ranks not with flair but with relentless logic, believing that reason could tame even the wildest empire. As Prime Minister in 1763, Grenville faced a post-war Britain drowning in debt and swelling with discontent. His solution was simple, cold, and fateful: tax the American colonies. The Stamp Act was meant to be efficient, a neat fiscal fix, but it ignited a fire he never intended. Across the Atlantic, riots erupted, pamphlets screamed tyranny, and the seeds of revolution were sown. At home, Grenville grew increasingly rigid, clashing with King George III and alienating allies who found him difficult, proud, and unbending. He saw policy as law, but politics as distraction. Behind his stern demeanor, Grenville harbored deep frustration. Why couldn't people see the logic? Why was foresight punished while recklessness applauded? His downfall came not in a blaze, but in a steady unraveling, as the king dismissed him and colleagues distanced themselves. Though he exited power, his legacy echoed far louder than his voice ever had. Grenville's tale is one of intellect over intuition, of a man who lit history's fuse without ever meaning to. Was he the villain of rebellion, or simply its unwitting architect? George Grenville was not a man of charm, but of calculation, a meticulous mind sharpened by law, order, and numbers. Born into a family of political weight, he climbed the ranks not with flair but with relentless logic, believing that reason could tame even the wildest empire. As Prime Minister in 1763, Grenville faced a post-war Britain drowning in debt and swelling with discontent. His solution was simple, cold, and fateful: tax the American colonies. The Stamp Act was meant to be efficient, a neat fiscal fix, but it ignited a fire he never intended. Across the Atlantic, riots erupted, pamphlets screamed tyranny, and the seeds of revolution were sown. At home, Grenville grew increasingly rigid, clashing with King George III and alienating allies who found him difficult, proud, and unbending. He saw policy as law, but politics as distraction. Behind his stern demeanor, Grenville harbored deep frustration. Why couldn't people see the logic? Why was foresight punished while recklessness applauded? His downfall came not in a blaze, but in a steady unraveling, as the king dismissed him and colleagues distanced themselves. Though he exited power, his legacy echoed far louder than his voice ever had. Grenville's tale is one of intellect over intuition, of a man who lit history's fuse without ever meaning to. Was he the villain of rebellion, or simply its unwitting architect?
What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.